Hey guys, No Huddle Fantasy Sports here. It is Saturday afternoon, and we're talking DFS for the NFL Divisional Round of Playoffs. It is a small but exciting slate on both DraftKings and FanDuel, and in this video, I'll be discussing my favorite players, my builds, guys I'll be fitting into my lineups, and the general strategy I'll be using to attack this slate. If that sounds interesting to you and you want some more information, stay tuned. Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome back to No Huddle Fantasy Sports. Welcome back to the channel. As always, thank you for finding this channel and tuning into these videos. We do have an exciting DFS NFL weekend. We're talking the divisional round NFL, DraftKings, FanDuel. They're offering anywhere from 2 to 4 game slates. The slate is split, or I should say the divisional weekend is split between Saturday and Sunday, 2 games each day. And the only thing I want to mention before we get too far into it is treat it just as that. This is a very, very small slate. You have limited players, limited teams to pick from. Beyond that, there's some massive home favorites in these games, a lot of really big underdogs, and that's going to affect strategy. I'm more of a tournament style player, so with this small slate, there's going to be a ton of chalk, so I'll be taking some risk and discussing that throughout this video. But looking at this weekend on Saturday, today at 4:45, the divisional round kicks off with Minnesota playing at San Francisco, 44.5 over under. The line, San Francisco is a pretty big touchdown favorite here at -7. These lines, keep in mind, may have moved over the last couple of days, but they should be close to this. Later on tonight, we have Tennessee playing at Baltimore. The over under is 46.5. Baltimore is a massive 10-point favorite right now. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have Houston kicking off in Kansas City, the biggest over under in the slate. So the most amount of points you can expect probably to see from a game is that game. Over under a 51. Kansas City, though, again, a massive home favorite at -10. And then probably the closest game, at least Vegas total wise, Seattle playing tomorrow night in Green Bay, 47 over under. Green Bay a favorite, home favorite at -5. Now, as I mentioned, you only have 4 games, limited pool to pick from here of players. I personally will be doing everything I can to play the 4-game slate. I know FanDuel, I think their main slates are split 2-2 between Saturday and Sunday, whereas DraftKings, the full main slate is all 4 games. Stick to the 4 games, that's my opinion. It helps with chalk, it helps you differentiate a little bit and get some different players in, and it makes it just more enjoyable, in my opinion, play as many teams and as many players as possible. One additional note I wrote down here is the wildcard weekend last weekend, another 4-game slate, split between Saturday and Sunday. Some of the most high-powered offenses, such as New Orleans, playing on that card, that slate. All games hit the under, and by a large margin. It was pretty significant, and you're talking about 2 games that went into overtime. So just an interesting note, something to keep in mind moving forward. And finally here, the last little note I mentioned is there's no weather concerns. All these games, unlike last weekend, are being played outdoors, but outside of some cold weather, everything looks to be fine in terms of weather. All right, so kicking off where I'll be heading at the quarterback position. I'm not trying to get cute here. I'm not trying to fade chalk or avoid anything like that, because these 2 guys, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, will be by far the highest owned quarterbacks on the slate, and I don't think it will even close, but I'm going to try to go Patrick Mahomes as my number 1 quarterback here. Should slightly be lower owned than Lamar Jackson. Also gives you a little bit of salary relief. Could be wrong on that, but again, I'm going to be playing both guys here. Patrick Mahomes, 7,500 on DraftKings, 8,600 on FanDuel, playing at home versus Houston. Largest over-under on the slate at 51. Kansas City is a big favorite at -9.5. That's the highest team projected points on the slate also for the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes in a great spot, has his full complement of healthy weapons. It includes Tyreek Hill all playing, had a week off. Everybody should be healthy. Houston's defense offers an elite matchup for quarterbacks this season. They're giving up 266 plus passing yards a game, 20 plus fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, all in 2019. And look, I understand that this works against most logic that we've worked with most of the year, which is a home quarterback, 9.5 big point favorite, things we don't like to go to, but it's Patrick Mahomes. The points will be scored for this team. They're going to be scored through the air. I know that Williams has gotten traction on the ground over the last few weeks, but I still think this is a team built around Patrick Mahomes in the past. There's little reason I don't think that even though they might win by 10, 14, multiple scores, those scores will be through the air, and Patrick Mahomes benefiting from that. So I'm going with Patrick Mahomes as my number 1 quarterback this weekend, regardless of of ownership. Next up here, I have Lamar Jackson. Again, similar deal here. Not caring about chalk, not caring about ownership. I'm just keeping it safe, going with the guys I know that will produce the most amount of points. He's 8,400 on DraftKings, 9,500 on FanDuel, much more expensive than Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, the most expensive quarterback on the slate. Playing at home versus Tennessee. A little bit smaller over-under here in total scored. 47.5 over-under. Baltimore, again, another home large favorite at -9.5. But again, I don't care about that. I'm going with the chalk here. I'm sticking with the main guys that are going to score the most amount of points. Obviously, Lamar Jackson is the consensus NFL MVP. If you didn't know that, well, whatever. He offers an elite floor, an elite ceiling, 8+ rushes and 86 rushing yards in 5 of the last 6 games. That highlights his floor there. Just will guarantee you nearly 10 points as a running back, essentially. He's had 3+ passing touchdowns in 5 of the last 6 games he played. Again, so you're basically talking about a running back plus a quarterback combined into one position. Easily the safest guy on the board, safest play. If you're playing cash games, just play Lamar Jackson. That's my advice to you. Again, I understand the biggest worry here is the fact that they are 9.5, 10-point favorites, multiple score type favorites, but it doesn't matter. You're talking about a 4-game slate. We're going to stick to the guns here. We're going to play the best players at the quarterback position. And I did look up some of his past games in which they had blowout wins. New York Jets, Los Angeles Rams, and Cincinnati, all recent examples. Lamar Jackson still had 30, 35, 40-point games versus these. So don't worry about the blowout potential. If they blow them out, he's still going to have 7,500 yards on the ground, multiple scores through the air, possibly a score on the ground. So don't worry about the fact that they are big favorites. Lamar Jackson, a key spot, a must play this weekend, in my opinion. Sliding over to the running back position here, this is where it gets tricky. I'm trying to differentiate, take advantage of some lower ownership. And with that, I did my research. I noticed a couple of things. It seems like Aaron Jones and Dalvin Cook are getting lots and lots of ownership. I didn't think Dalvin Cook would originally, playing against San Francisco on the road, but things change. It seems like Derrick Henry, again, is going to get lower ownership, and we're talking he might even get under 10% ownership. I understand the reasoning. He's in a really tough spot. He cannot keep this pace up. Logically, it doesn't make sense. He's averaging so many yards per carry, getting so many touches, and they're big underdogs. Doesn't make sense for Derrick Henry, but we're playing a 4-game slate here. I think this is high risk, but I'm going with Derrick Henry at 8,200 on DraftKings, 9,800 on FanDuel. His price and matchup is going to keep his ownership down. And I understand the reason to not play Derrick Henry in this spot, but we're talking 4-game. You have to get different here. I think Derrick Henry is the quintessential example of a lower owned guy that still is, he's the best play of a low owned guy, if that makes sense. He could put up, again, another 30, 35 touch game, tons and tons of yards. If you look back to last week, the dude is simply just on a roll. Week 17, he had, I think, 32 touches. Last week, he had 35 touches. The wild card game last week, again, against a very, very stout New England defense in New England, 35 touches, 182 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown. Just destroyed New England over and over again. Just the willpower of that offensive line and them just continuing to pound the rock over and over again just broke down that New England defense. Massive volume, as I mentioned, 67 touches over his last 2 games. The good thing here is that offensive and defensive line matchup. We know Titans have a great offensive line. We know the Baltimore Ravens have a great defense, but the offense and D-line matchup on Pro Football Focus is still positive in favor, pretty significantly in favor of the Tennessee Titans at +6%. So we still have an advantage there. Still have an advantage with that offensive line being so good. The other thing I want to mention here is good offensive lines and good running backs have had found success rushing the ball versus Baltimore this year. If you look at San Francisco, Cincinnati, Cleveland, throughout the year, you've had some really big rushing performances and fantasy point performances out of select good running backs. So all good things here to see. Reason to possibly play him. Again, you're looking at lower ownership due to the matchup and price. A lot of risk here. Easily could go down 14, 21 points. They could abandon the run and Derrick Henry kind of gets phased out of the game. But for the most part, if this game is close, and I think it's within 10 points, they will continue to run the ball. That is how Tennessee is winning games right now. That is their best asset. Their offensive line in trolling games. That's the only way they're going to beat Baltimore. I think that they continue, at least for 3/4 of this game, they're going to just continue to feed Derrick Henry and build behind that offensive line. If he's going to be that low owned, 5-10% ownership, I'm going Derrick Henry in most of my lineups. So we've got got to find some salary relief here. I could just give you Dalvin Cook. I could just give you Aaron Jones as the next guy. But in reality, I can't build lineups with all of these guys together. So what in reality am I doing? Marshawn Lynch is showing up a lot in my lineups. 4,800 on DraftKings, really, really good price there. 6,000 on FanDuel, playing at Green Bay, 45.5 over under. Seattle is an underdog, albeit not as bad as the other teams here at 4.5, getting 4.5 points. But again, you're looking at a guy, Marshawn Lynch, that could provide some salary relief and value. Beast mode is back in Seattle. His snap count, his play, everything has increased over the last couple of weeks. If you look at actually box scores and focus on snap count, not just carries. Beyond that, Pete Carroll has actually mentioned that Marshawn Lynch is now in his third game. He's slated for a larger role. We've seen him get most, if not all, of the red zone touches. So if they get close, he's in a good spot to score a touchdown. And finally here, Green Bay actually struggles to defend the rush. When they play good running backs, when they play running backs in general, that's how you exploit Green Bay. They're allowing 109 plus rushing yards a game. That's a really bad number there. 26 plus fantasy per game to the running back position. So again, a good spot, but the big thing here is the fact that he is so cheap. You're looking for salary relief. You don't have many options in this price range. He's a guy that's finding his way into most of my lineups. Hopefully we can get maybe 12, 15 total carries out of him, an easy score, maybe a target or two. All good things I like to see. Marshawn Lynch is finding his way into a lot of my lineups at his current price tag. Where I will be spending a little bit of money is at the wide receiver position this weekend. I'm going to immediately pair Tyreek Hill with Patrick Mahomes. He's 7,600 on DraftKings, 7,900 on FanDuel. I love that price on FanDuel. Versus Houston, obviously playing at home. Again, 51.5 over under. Kansas City, a big favorite at -9.5, projected as the most amount of points to be scored in that game, most amount of points for a single team in the Kansas City Chiefs. Stacking him with Mahomes. It's a great stack, great matchup. Slate best wide receiver cornerback matchup projection. Pro Football Focus has that as a positive 25%. Easily by far the best wide receiver cornerback matchup on the slate. Highest ceiling, in my opinion, among all wide receivers. We know what this guy can do. Blow the top off defense. Even on 5 or 6 catches, he can score, multiple touchdowns, have 150 yards. He just has that slate busting breakout potential each and every week. I realize he hasn't been that good towards the end of the season, but I really think that's just an anomaly. He's going to come around here. He's healthy. He's coming back into his own. And Houston's defense is a great matchup. It's a top matchup I mentioned already for quarterbacks, so that naturally lends to the fact that it's a good matchup for wide receivers. It's a top 10 matchup in terms of points given up to wide receiver ones, outside receivers, and guys that break coverage, go deep, which fits obviously the profile of Tyreek Hill. And last little note here, Houston is allowing a below average 35 plus fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. All good things. Great matchup for Tyreek Hill. Great matchup for Kansas City's passing attack. I like stacking him with Mahomes, obviously, but I will go with him outside of even a stack. The next guy I have listed here, Deebo Samuel, trying to save us a couple bucks here at 5,200 on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel. Look, here's the deal. I'm not going to sit here and provide you Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and I could easily do that, say play these guys, good luck this weekend, but there's no way. I'm realistically not fitting that stack of guys in my lineups. There's no way you are without playing guys that just aren't going to play. So I'm giving you guys I'm legitimately going to play here. Deebo Samuel, to try to save some money at wide receiver, is finding his way into my lineups. Mentioned his price already. Playing at home versus Minnesota, 44.5 over under. San Francisco and Samuel, they're favored by 7 points, so a pretty big favorite here. But again, he's a guy where in this price range, we're really struggling to find guys here. He's averaging 5 plus targets a game and 53 plus reception yards a game. Not the greatest numbers in the world, but considering who you're picking amongst, decent numbers, guys that we can find points from, I think Deebo Samuel is that guy. The one note here, it doesn't seem too impressive, but 1.1 red zone targets a game. That's actually third on the slate and just behind Devontae Adams. I believe Adams averages 1.5 red zone targets a game. Deebo Samuel just behind him there. A very respectable third on the slate in terms of getting opportunities in the red zone. Some other quick notes here. He's had 13 plus fantasy points per game, 5 of the last 6 games. So we're pretty reliable here in terms of getting double-digit fantasy points. He's second best on the slate in terms of a wide receiver cornerback matchup. I mentioned Tyreek Hill is the number 1 guy in terms of that wide receiver Pro Football Focus cornerback matchup. Number 2 is Deebo Samuel. It is Xavier Rhodes as the projection. Big name, big cornerback. but a guy that has not had a good season, has actually had a really, really bad season. So Pro Football Focus has Deebo Samuel at a positive 20% matchup. Again, a good thing. Things we have to take advantage of, these small things that we can find to make sure at these cheaper price tags, we're getting guys that not only are in good spots, but that can produce based upon their opportunity. Last little note here in terms of matchup stuff, Vikings have really struggled all year versus outside receivers. In fact, they're the second worst in terms of fantasy points given up to outside receivers. They're pretty good. They're decent on the inside versus inside receivers, but outside receivers have been able to take advantage of them. Michael Thomas, really anomaly last week. They were able to defend him pretty well, but I would disregard that and focus on what we have, which is a full season of them struggling versus outside receivers. Deebo Samuel in a great spot on a lot of different fronts here and saves you some dollars. Finally here, everybody's favorite position. Obviously, you can pay up here for Travis Kelce and George Kittle. I prefer Kelce over Kittle if you're going to do that, but in terms of the lineups I've been able to build based upon guys I've already given you, I can't afford those guys really. The two guys I'm looking at are Mark Andrews and Jimmy Graham. We're going from a decent guy to a guy that has literally been really bad all season long, but Mark Andrews pairs perfectly with Lamar Jackson. 5,600 on DraftKings, 7,000 on FanDuel. Decent price tags there, a guy you can afford in that middle tier. Versus Tennessee, already mentioned all of this. Baltimore a big favorite, 47.5 over under. He's basically established as Jackson's most consistent number one receiver or targeted guy. Stack with him, I already mentioned that. He's been targeted on 32% of the routes he runs. So when he runs a route, he literally has a 32% chance of being targeted during that route. That is the slate number one in terms of that percentage, and that includes wide receivers. Devontae Adams does not get targeted more on routes run than Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews is number one. So again, good things we like to focus on here. Season-ending top 6 NFL red zone target guy with 19. It's resulted in 9 total touchdowns. So we have the red zone opportunity to stack with that. And finally here, I've already talked about it a number of times in terms of matchups according to Pro Football Focus. He's the slate highest tight end matchup advantage at plus 23%. So Mark Andrews in a great spot, easily stacks with Lamar Jackson. I do like him as my favorite tight end this weekend, divisional round football. Now, if you're trying to save money and you want to get a little risky, you can go with Jimmy Graham. People are talking about him. He's not going to be unowned, but he is really, really cheap on DraftKings at $3,300. Great price tag there. $5,000 on FanDuel. We already talked about Green Bay being a decent favorite here at 4.5, 45.5 over under. The matchup is what makes this play the key. Again, he's extremely cheap, especially on DraftKings. He could offer a rare value on this slate and a salary relief. Jimmy Graham just simply has not been good for Green Bay this season. But again, it's the Seattle defense, the matchup here that makes it key, and couple that with his price tag. Seattle's number 2 in the NFL in terms of the most amount of points given up to the tight end position. Every week this season, we talked about Arizona Cardinals giving up touchdowns. Well, just behind them is Seattle. Tight ends are averaging anywhere from 13 to 16 fantasy points per game versus that Seattle defense. At his price, if he gets a couple catches and a score, especially on DraftKings, Jimmy Graham could blow through that price tag. Playing him allows you to stack like a Derrick Henry and a Dalvin Cook and, a Lamar or a Mahomes. It actually, playing him allows and fits other major players. So I do like Jimmy Graham if you're looking for that salary relief at tight end. All right, so that wraps up the video and my preview here for the NFL DFS Divisional Round Playoff Weekend. We're talking about a small 4-game but exciting slate here. I've given you my favorite players, my strategy, guys I legit am finding that fit best to my lineups for this weekend. Obviously, a lot of this strategy and the plays I've picked are based upon ownership and other things. If you guys have any other information, if you think I'm off on any of this ownership projection, if I'm missing any players that are pretty obvious, please let me know down in the comments below. This also likely will be the last NFL DFS video for the season. Everything shortens down to pretty much unplayable slates. You're talking 2-game, 1-game slates, stuff that we're not really interested in here. But as always, I just want to thank you guys so much for tuning into the channel, finding this video. If you're just tuning into these videos for the first time, go ahead, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel if you haven't done so already. Easiest way to help support No Huddle Fantasy Sports and keep up to date with all future videos. I do hope this video does provide you guys some value. And as always, last but not least, good luck this weekend, and I hope to see you atop the leaderboards.